In the heart of a stormy night, Flight 403 pierced through the turbulent clouds above the Pacific. The passengers were nestled in their seats, some sleeping, others watching movies to distract themselves from the violent thunder outside. Little did they know, a sinister mystery awaited them in the cockpit. Captain Mark Richardson and First Officer Sarah Collins were a seasoned team, having flown together for years without incident, but tonight was different. As they navigated through the storm, strange whispers echoed through the cockpit, barely audible over the roar of the engines. Sarah glanced at Mark, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. Mark shook his head, his eyes fixed on the instruments before him. "Probably just interference from the storm, nothing to worry about." But Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to communicate something urgent. She stole a glance at the window, half expecting to see something staring back at her from the darkness beyond. Suddenly, the navigation system flickered, casting an eerie glow across the cockpit. Mark's hands tightened on the controls as the plane veered slightly off course. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice rising in panic. "I don't know," Mark replied, his voice strained. "Something's interfering with the systems. I'm trying to regain control." But before he could do anything, the lights in the cockpit went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The only sound was the howling wind outside. Sarah fumbled for a flashlight, her heart racing with fear. When she turned it on, she gasped in horror. Mark was gone. The pilot's seat was empty, the seatbelt hanging loosely as if he had vanished into thin air. "Mark?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, only the static of the radio crackling faintly in the background. With trembling hands, Sarah tried to radio for help, but all she heard was static. The whispers had returned, louder and more frantic than before. "Where are you? What do you want?" Sarah shouted into the darkness, her voice desperate. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything fell silent. The whispers ceased, the lights flickered back on, and the navigation system stabilized. But there was no sign of Mark, no explanation for what had just happened. Sarah's mind raced with fear and confusion. How could her co-pilot vanish into thin air? Was it a hallucination, a trick of the storm, or something far more sinister? As she struggled to make sense of the situation, a voice crackled through the radio, startling her. "Flight 403, this is air traffic control. We've lost contact with you for a few minutes. Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of what to say. I don't know. Captain Richardson is missing." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a skeptical response. "Missing? Are you sure? Is this some kind of joke?" "It's not a joke," Sarah exclaimed, her voice quivering with emotion. "I don't know what happened. One moment he was here, and the next, he was gone." The controller's tone softened. "Okay, calm down. We'll try to establish contact with the aircraft and figure out what's going on. Just stay on course and keep us updated." Sarah nodded, even though she knew the controller couldn't see her. She felt a sense of dread settling over her, the realization sinking in that something inexplicable and terrifying was unfolding around her. As she continued to fly the plane, alone and haunted by the memory of Mark's disappearance, strange occurrences began to plague Flight 403. Lights flickered, alarms sounded for no reason, and the passengers grew increasingly restless and fearful. Sarah tried to maintain her composure, to reassure the passengers that everything was under control, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. There was a malevolent presence aboard the plane, something that defied logic and reason. Hours passed like a nightmare, each moment fraught with tension and uncertainty. Sarah's mind raced with questions. What had happened to Mark? Was he still alive somewhere? Or had he been taken by whatever force was at work? As dawn approached and the storm began to dissipate, Sarah saw something outside the cockpit window that made her blood run cold. A figure, standing on the wing of the plane, staring at her with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. She blinked, thinking it was a trick of exhaustion or her frazzled nerves. But when she looked again, the figure was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of its presence. Terrified, but determined, Sarah pressed on, hoping against hope that she would find answers, that she would survive whatever nightmare had befallen Flight 403. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, the whispers returned, this time louder and clearer than ever. "Join us," they hissed, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. "Join us in the void." Sarah gripped the controls tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew then that she was facing something beyond her understanding, something ancient and malevolent that sought to claim her soul. But she refused to give in. With sheer willpower and desperation, she fought against the whispers, against the darkness that threatened to consume her. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The whispers ceased, the presence vanished, and Flight 403 emerged from the storm, battered but intact. As Sarah landed the plane and the passengers disembarked, she was met with a mix of relief and confusion. No one could explain what had happened, what had caused the disappearance of Captain Richardson, or the strange phenomena that had plagued the flight. Sarah resigned from her position shortly after, unable to shake off the trauma of that night, haunted by the memory of the whispers and the figure on the wing. To this day, Flight 403 remains a mystery, a cautionary tale whispered among pilots and aviation enthusiasts. Some say it was a freak accident. Others believe it was something more sinister, something beyond the realm of science and reason. But one thing is certain: the vanishing of Flight 403's crew will forever remain a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved, some terrors best left unspoken. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We'll be back with more fascinating stories from the world of crime. Until then, stay curious and stay safe.
Hi, my name is Jackson, and I am from England. I am a well-settled businessman and living a happy life with my wife. Today I will tell you a story about my unforgotten flight. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously as I stepped into the deserted airport terminal. It was well past midnight, and the only sound that greeted me was the echo of my own footsteps against the tiled floor. The terminal felt unusually cold, despite the warm summer night outside. I had arrived at the airport to catch a late-night flight, but as I approached the check-in counter, a sense of unease washed over me. There were no airport staff in sight, no bustling crowd of passengers. It was as if the terminal had been abandoned in a hurry. Trying to shake off the feeling of dread, I walked towards the departure gates, hoping to find some sign of life. But the further I ventured into the terminal, the more the sense of foreboding grew. As I reached the departure gates, I noticed something peculiar. There were several bags scattered on the ground, as if their owners had dropped them in a panic. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper coming from one of the nearby gates. It was almost imperceptible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, then mustered up the courage to investigate. As I got closer, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from behind the closed gate. With trembling hands, I reached out and pushed it open. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The gate led to a dimly lit corridor, lined with empty seats. But what caught my attention were the figures standing at the far end of the corridor. Shadowy figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Were they passengers? Or something else entirely? Before I could gather my thoughts, the figures vanished into thin air, leaving behind an eerie silence. Fear gnawed at my insides as I stumbled back from the gate. I knew I had to get out of there, but every instinct told me to stay and uncover the truth behind the vanishing passengers. As I made my way through the terminal, I heard a muffled cry coming from one of the nearby corridors. Without thinking, I followed the sound, my heart racing with every step. I rounded a corner and came face to face with a chilling sight. A group of hooded figures stood huddled around a young woman, their faces obscured by the darkness. They seemed to be chanting in a language I couldn't understand, their voices low and menacing. Before I could react, the figures turned towards me, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Without a word, they lunged forward, grabbing me by the arms and dragging me into the shadows. I awoke to darkness, my head throbbing with pain, as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. Realized I was in some kind of underground chamber, surrounded by the hooded figures from the terminal. Panic gripped me as I struggled against my restraints, but it was no use. I was trapped, at the mercy of these mysterious kidnappers. As the hours passed, the hooded figures moved about the chamber, their movements fluid and silent. I watched in horror as they performed strange rituals, their chants echoing off the cold stone walls. Tried to make sense of what was happening, but the more I tried to understand, the more confused I became. Who were these people? And what did they want from me? Days turned into weeks as I languished in the darkness, my mind teetering on the brink of madness. The hooded figures continued their rituals, their chants growing louder and more frenzied with each passing night. I soon realized that I was not alone in the chamber. Other captives were brought in, their eyes vacant and hollow. They spoke in hushed whispers of the horrors they had witnessed, of passengers vanishing into thin air without a trace. But the worst was yet to come. As the night of the full moon approached, the hooded figures prepared for their most sinister ritual, yet the sacrifice of the chosen ones. I watched in horror as they dragged the hateless victims to the center of the chamber, their chants reaching fever pitch. And then, with a flash of silver, they plunged their knives into the hearts of the sacrifices, their blood spilling onto the cold stone floor. As the screams of the dying echoed through the chamber, I knew I had to escape before I became the next victim. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from my restraints and bolted towards the nearest exit. The hooded figures gave chase, their cries of rage echoing in my ears. But I was determined to survive, to make it out of this nightmare alive. Emerged from the underground chamber into the deserted terminal, my heart pounding in my chest. The flickering lights seemed to taunt me as I raced towards the exit, the memory of the horrors I had witnessed burning in my mind. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that I would never be the same again. The whispering terminal had claimed its victims, but somehow, against all odds, I had escaped its clutches. But even now, as I look back on that fateful night, I can still hear the whispers in the darkness, reminding me that some nightmares never truly end. In the sprawling labyrinth of a busy airport terminal, amidst the ceaseless flow of travelers and the cacophony of announcements, a sinister plot unfolded. A clandestine group of kidnappers, shrouded in darkness and mystery, operated with precision and stealth. It was a typical bustling day at the airport. Passengers rushing to catch flights, families bidding tearful goodbyes, and businessmen engrossed in their smartphones. Amidst the chaos, the kidnappers moved like shadows, their eyes scanning the crowd for their next target. Among the sea of faces, they spotted their prey, a lone traveler. Lost in thought, his briefcase clutched tightly to his chest. With practiced ease, they closed in, their movements calculated and swift. In an instant, they surrounded him, their faces obscured by masks, their intentions ominous. The unsuspecting traveler barely had time to react before he was whisked away. Vanishing into the depths of the terminal, panic rippled through the crowd as whispers of the abduction spread like wildfire. But by then, it was too late. The kidnappers had melted back into the shadows, leaving behind only questions and fear. As news of the abduction spread, law enforcement agencies sprang into action, launching a massive investigation to unravel the mystery behind the disappearances. Detective Alex Turner, a seasoned investigator with a knack for solving the most baffling cases, was assigned to lead the investigation. With each passing day, the number of disappearances grew, sending shockwaves through the community and sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust. The airport, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now loomed like a fortress of fear, its corridors haunted by the specter of the unknown. As Detective Turner delved deeper into the case, he uncovered a tangled web of secrets and lies, leading him down a rabbit hole of conspiracy and intrigue. The kidnappers, it seemed, were more organized and elusive than he had initially suspected, leaving behind few clues and even fewer witnesses. But Turner was undeterred, his determination fueled by a relentless pursuit of justice. He pored over surveillance footage, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together fragments of evidence, inching closer to the truth with each passing day. Just when it seemed like the investigation had reached a dead end, a breakthrough came in the most unexpected of ways. A tip from an anonymous source led Turner to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, a makeshift hideout for the kidnappers. With backup in tow, Turner raided the warehouse, his heart pounding with anticipation as he closed in on the elusive perpetrators. What he found inside sent shivers down his spine: a makeshift prison, its walls lined with cages, each containing a terrified victim. But the most chilling discovery came when Turner stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its walls adorned with maps and diagrams detailing the kidnappers' sinister plot. It was then that the true scope of their operation became clear. They weren't just targeting random victims, but individuals with valuable information and connections. As Turner surveyed the scene, a sense of grim realization washed over him. The kidnappers weren't working alone. They were part of a larger conspiracy, one that reached far beyond the confines of the airport terminal. And if he didn't act fast, countless more innocent lives would be lost to the shadows. Armed with newfound knowledge, Turner raced against the clock to unravel the tangled web of deceit and betrayal that had ensnared his city. With each piece of the puzzle falling into place, he realized that the key to stopping the kidnappers lay not in brute force, but in cunning and strategy. Gathering his team, Turner formulated a plan to lure the kidnappers out of hiding, using themselves as bait to draw them into the open. It was a risky gambit, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Turner knew that it was the only way to end the reign of terror once and for all. As the fateful day dawned, tensions ran high as Turner and his team took their positions, their nerves steeling themselves for the showdown that lay ahead. Hours passed like an eternity, each minute stretching into infinity as they waited for the inevitable confrontation. And then, just as darkness began to fall, the kidnappers emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted in sinister grins as they closed in on their prey. But they were met with a force they hadn't anticipated, a united front of law enforcement, ready and willing to do whatever it took to bring them to justice. In the ensuing chaos, a fierce battle erupted, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing through the night air as Turner and his team fought tooth and nail to subdue their adversaries. And when the dust finally settled, the kidnappers lay defeated, their reign of terror brought to a swift and decisive end, with the kidnappers behind bars and their conspiracy unraveled. A sense of relief washed over the city, its inhabitants finally free from the specter of fear that had gripped them for so long. And as Turner stood amidst the wreckage of the battle, a sense of satisfaction filled his heart, knowing that justice had prevailed in the end. But even as the city began to heal and move on, Turner knew that the scars left behind by the kidnappers' reign of terror would not fade easily. The shadows may have receded for now, but they lingered still, reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. And so, as he looked out over the city's skyline, Turner vowed to remain vigilant, knowing that the fight against evil was never truly over. For as long as there were those who sought to spread fear and chaos, there would always be those willing to stand up and fight against them, no matter the cost. It was a bustling morning at the international airport, with passengers scurrying to catch flights. Everyone is rushing for his flight, luggage wheels humming across the polished floors, and announcements echoing through the terminals. Among the throngs of people, a group of 4 individuals stood out, their demeanor subtly different, their gazes calculating. These were not ordinary travelers. They were a well-organized group of kidnappers, each with a specific role to play in their meticulously crafted plan. Led by a man named Dominic, a former intelligence operative turned criminal mastermind. They had spent months devising the perfect scheme to execute at the airport. Everything is planned perfectly. Their target, wealthy passengers arriving on private jets. Their method, abduction without a trace. They are targeting rich personalities of the city. As the morning sun cast long shadows through the terminal windows, Dominic and his team positioned themselves strategically, blending in seamlessly with the crowd. They wore nondescript attire, their faces obscured by sunglasses and baseball caps, their movements purposeful yet inconspicuous. Across the terminal, a sleek private jet taxied to a stop on the tarmac. Inside, a group of affluent travelers disembarked, their designer luggage trailing behind them. Among them was Charlotte Sinclair, a successful businesswoman returning from a high-stake meeting overseas. Charlotte is one of the famous businesswomen of the city. Unbeknownst to Charlotte, she had been targeted by Dominic's group due to her substantial wealth and influential connections. As she made her way through the terminal, absorbed in her phone and oblivious to her surroundings, the kidnappers sprang into action. With practiced precision, they surrounded Charlotte, moving swiftly to cut off any potential escape routes. Before she could react, she found herself encircled by the group, their expressions steely and determined. In a matter of moments, Charlotte was whisked away from the bustling terminal, her cries for help drowned out by the ambient noise of the airport. Dominic's team moved with calculated efficiency, guiding her through a labyrinth of service corridors and hidden passageways. Meanwhile, chaos erupted in the terminal as Charlotte's disappearance sent shockwaves through the crowd. Security personnel scrambled to review surveillance footage, but Dominic had anticipated their every move, leaving no trace of their presence behind. In a secluded area of the airport, Charlotte found herself bound and blindfolded, her heart pounding with fear as she struggled to make sense of her predicament. Dominic loomed over her, his voice low and menacing as he delivered his demands. As the hours ticked by, Dominic contacted Charlotte's family. outlining his demands in exchange for her safe return. He demanded a hefty ransom, along with assurances of immunity from prosecution for himself and his team. Back in the terminal, Charlotte's family grappled with the impossible decision before them. Faced with the prospect of losing their loved one forever, they reluctantly agreed to Dominic's terms, knowing that their only hope lay in complying with his demands. As negotiations unfolded behind the scenes, a team of seasoned detectives was hot on Dominic's trail, determined to unravel the mystery of the vanished passengers. Led by Detective Georgina Reynolds, a tenacious investigator with a knack for cracking tough cases, they scoured the airport for clues, poring over surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses in their quest for answers. With each passing hour, the pressure mounted as Charlotte's fate hung in the balance. Time was of the essence, and the detectives knew that they had to act quickly if they were to have any hope of rescuing her before it was too late. In a tense standoff, Dominic and his team awaited the arrival of the ransom money. Their nerves stretched to the breaking point as they watched the minutes tick by on the airport clock. As the designated drop-off time approached, tensions reached a fever pitch, with Charlotte's life hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, Detective Reynolds and her team closed in on Dominic's location, their hearts pounding with adrenaline as they prepared to launch a daring rescue operation. With backup on standby and a carefully coordinated plan in place, they moved swiftly to apprehend the kidnappers and secure Charlotte's safe return. In a dramatic showdown, gunfire erupted as Dominic's team attempted to make their escape, but the detectives were ready, their aim true as they neutralized the threat and rescued Charlotte from her captors' clutches. As dawn broke over the airport terminal, Charlotte was reunited with her family, tears of relief streaming down their faces as they embraced each other tightly. The ordeal was finally over, but the scars would linger. Constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. For Dominic and his team, justice awaited, their reign of terror brought to an abrupt end by the relentless pursuit of law enforcement. As they were led away in handcuffs, their faces grim and defiant, they knew that they would pay the price for their crimes. And so, life at the airport returned to normal, the hustle and bustle of travelers coming and going, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their midst. But for Charlotte and her family, the memory of that fateful day would never fade, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity.